We've heard all day from people in communities standing at a turning point, an inflection point, navigating the gap between what was and what comes next. What was and what comes next. And it's that in-between space that we're going to talk about on this panel, where our movement has power and where cash meets people where they are and can serve as a bridge to the next thing. So this panel is going to help us understand the question, when an industry that sustains a community disappears, what do we do? When there's AI displacement or an energy transition, what do we do? These fine people are going to answer those questions, not me. I'm just asking the questions. So, we're going to hear from Marcela, from Somos in New Mexico. We're going to hear from Shivum, who works in the Shapiro administration in Pennsylvania. We're going to hear from Catherine, who holds the AI industry accountable. And across these three brilliant leaders, we're going to understand how cash connects, whether it's in the Permian Basin in New Mexico or the loss of coal and steel in Pennsylvania or the loss of work from AI. Cash is the connector across all those things. And what we're really talking about is giving people a floor so they have the power and capacity to fight for the ceiling. Let me say that again. We're talking about giving people a floor so they have the power and capacity to fight for a ceiling. Are you with me? All right, let's get going. So Marcela,
yes,
I'm going to come to you first because Somos, the organization you founded and you lead, has been embedded in New Mexico communities now for a long time. And I want to start with sort of the on-the-ground reality that the folks you organize, the workers and community members you organize, deal with. So talk to us about the first signs for your folk that fossil fuel workers needed transition support. And how did you land on cash as the mechanism for that support? So talk to us about what's the context facing the workers you organize and why cash?
Well, thanks for that introduction. Very exciting. I love talking about New Mexico, and I love talking about our members. We organize immigrant workers for economic justice and racial justice. We've been doing that for 30 years. This is our 31st anniversary. And traditionally an immigrants' rights organization, but we always say if you're listening to your members and you're actually organizing people who are immigrants, you will inevitably become a workers' rights organization, an economic justice organization, if they are leading the work, because we are not just our immigration status, we are people in our communities dealing with so many intersectional issues along with our brothers and sisters in these communities. What I can say in this context, and I want to talk a little bit about New Mexico and our members, is that for us, cash is not just a safety net for immigrant oil and gas workers and their families, but it really is about energy transition infrastructure that we're trying to build that is necessary not just for our families, but for our state, for our future economy, and for the planet. New Mexico is an oil and gas state, neighbors to Texas. We are the second largest crude oil producing state in the country after Texas. And we are big producers of natural gas. And 30 to 40% on any given year of our state budget comes from oil and gas revenues. And so the oil and gas men who are very much embedded in every aspect of politics of the Permian Basin region in New Mexico love, from their air-conditioned offices, to talk about how essential they are for workers and for education and for public services and infrastructure in our communities. But we have the great joy of organizing immigrant oil and gas workers and their families who say, no, actually, the state doesn't depend on you, it depends on us. And so we're gonna go to our state house and we're gonna continue to fight for more money to come back into our communities to help us get the support that we need to thrive as families. And so it's a very volatile industry. We experience a lot of boom and bust cycles. like the industry worldwide. But what we know is that about 17% of our workforce in the energy sector in New Mexico is foreign-born. 15% are women, often with small children. And we live, and many of us are in mixed status families and undocumented. And so what really got us into this was the pandemic, because it exposed exactly why cash matters, even for oil and gas workers who are on our members, sort of the lowest rung of the industry, between $65,000, $75,000 a year, but working 12 to 16-hour shifts in one of the most dangerous, least regulated industries, and no time for their families, no time to actually be able to get out of the industry or even move up within the industry because they are working their butts off. And really, lots of accidents. I mean, really, some of the least safe conditions in our state. And so during the pandemic, the price of the barrel briefly fell under zero, which I didn't know was possible, but happened. And so many of our members who help fuel the economy of our state were out of work for 6 months with no unemployment benefits, no stimulus checks, no pandemic relief. And that was just a little too much for them and for us to bear. So we organized with the help of UpTogether and so many others for cash assistance, pandemic relief for excluded workers. But that's just one problem, the safety net not working and excluding people who are absolutely vital to our economy. 12 to 15-hour days, really dangerous work. We worked with the University of New Mexico to corroborate the experiences of our lives. And they found that 46% of our industry, in the immigrant part of the industry, had experienced an accident on the job or had seen someone die in their workplace on the job. And tellingly, 78% of oil and gas families didn't want their children to go into the industry. So our members were saying, this transition isn't just important for everyone else. This transition is vital for the future of our families. And so that's where we started to do this work. So that transition for them isn't just about green jobs. It really is about survival. So our state has a problem. We highly rely on this industry. It's not good for a resilient and robust future economy. So our state has taken great pains and has embarked on many short and long-term efforts to diversify our economy. But it's hard to attract industry when you have stagnant population growth, with the exception of immigrant workers, particularly in rural communities and in the border region of our state. And also when you have one of the lowest labor participation rates in the country, one of the highest low adult literacy rates in the country, one of the lowest high school equivalency rates or graduation rates in the country. And one of the highest English language learner rates in the country. So when you have a workforce that you're not investing in through ESL programs, through workforce development programs, through integrated education training programs, particularly in rural communities and in these areas that are highly reliant on oil and gas, what that means is you're not going to have a transition. So and you're not going to be able to attract the industries that we want to attract. So that's where we began. That's where we started. First, by organizing so that we could get more of those programs in our communities. But when you're working 16-hour shifts or two low-wage jobs, when you're overemployed, when are you supposed to go to an English class? When are you supposed to go to a welding class or a CDL license or an integrated education training program that marries adult ed with a credential or a certification? So that's where cash came in. And our folks said, we need to be working less so that we can actually be investing not just in the future of our own abilities and skills building and credentials, but our family and the future of New Mexico. So that's what we were able to fight for, and that's what we've been able to win. So not just over $40 million to increase programming that meets the needs of our communities and this transition in rural communities, but $11 million for cash assistance through a program called New Mexico Ascend that UpTogether, woot woot, UpTogether is helping our state platform and do. $1,000 a month for up to a year for workers who are training in these integrated education training programs that are meant for low-wage workers, disadvantaged, hard-to-reach workers, to bolster that workforce, but also for oil and gas workers, legacy workers, the children or spouses of immigrant oil and gas workers who want to transition and who are currently transitioning into green energy jobs in rural communities. And that is how, for us, cash is not just the safety net, but really what is going to allow for a continued just transition and an economic future for our state.
That's amazing, and partly what I'm taking away from that is cash is infrastructure for the transition. So it's not just for individuals, but it's infrastructure for a community, for the state, really. Shivum, I want to transition to you, because when I think about Pennsylvania, we've heard about oil and gas as a big part of the New Mexican economy. In Pennsylvania, it used to be coal and steel, but my sense is it's no longer that anymore. You happen to work for the governor. Your assignment, as I understand it, is to imagine and think about proactive policies for workers displaced, whether from steel, coal, or AI. So talk to us about how you are leading that work, how you're thinking about what are the kinds of transitions and infrastructure necessary for workers in your state.
Thanks, Dorian. First, thanks for having me out here. This is an amazing group. Thanks for being on this panel with me. We have a history as in Pennsylvania, as Marcela does in Texas, with the hydrocarbon industry and also with deindustrialization. And we know how important it is to address those types of transitions proactively. And so first, I'll talk a little bit about that work in the AI context. The governor has been proactive about putting AI in the hands of employees because that means that we have the opportunity to potentially provide services more effectively to folks. But he has done so with the explicit acknowledgement and agreement that AI will not be there to replace workers, and in fact, set formal guidelines around that with union partners, with SEIU, which represents 10,000 Commonwealth employees, to say, hey, this is a tool for the Commonwealth employee who has the knowledge and expertise to use it. And so those types of worker protections on the front end, we find to be very, very important, and signing that AI labor letter was one of the first actions we took alongside AI deployment and AI enablement in our workforce. And I think, as the economy moves towards more contractual, more precarious work, even prior to AI, that type of worker protection will only become more salient. Just to speak to the cash part of this for a moment, the governor has prioritized cutting taxes for working families, including through the Working Pennsylvanians Tax Credit, our earned income tax credit. And we're also in the fortunate position to be the only growing economy in the Northeast, which means there are jobs to fill. And to Marcela's point about the training that requires, it requires training and care and thought. And I'll just provide two quick examples from the administration. One is on increasing our investment in career and technical education, apprenticeship programs, pre-apprenticeship programs. And the second I'll highlight is our childcare recruitment and retention credits and bonuses to value that work appropriately, help stabilize those who pursue that work, and that goes for other industries. We have a strategic plan with 5 core industries, and so whether it's someone who is reskilling into advanced manufacturing or biotech or nursing, providing the supports and the resources for them to do that is critical. And so those are some of the tools from the worker protection side of things to cash to trainings that we believe can help us and with this latest transition.
I want to do a quick follow-up, and because it is the final panel of the day, so I want to inject a little controversy maybe. And if you need to take off your official hat to answer this question, that's fine.
Perfect.
Because you represent the governor, but you also are your own person. So I just want to give you that out Okay? So there's like something apparently going on in this country around data centers. Have you heard of this?
I've heard.
Right? Okay. So talk to me about, and I think one thing we've seen is a lot of resistance to data centers. Yes? So talk to us about, like, what are some alternative ways to think about, and what have you seen on the ground in Pennsylvania of how communities organizing around data centers, what are the options on the table for organizers? So there's opposition. Are there other things as well? That's what I really want to open up here.
Cool. Yeah, let's do it. I'll give you the fun answer, then I'll back into the official answer as well. I'll give you both. So I think that it's been cool to see communities really getting smart on this topic quickly, and I think that one of the one very concrete example of that is, I think one of the first in the nation community benefits agreements was signed in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. For those of you who know your PA geography, that's where our Amish community, yeah. And so there was a proposed development there, and there was an organized community, and there was a community benefits agreement that was signed that had a lot of really interesting provisions in terms of visibility into whether it's energy usage, water usage, in terms of what the community wants to see out of that investment that makes it worthwhile for them. And so, and this is the part where I back into the official piece here, that is where the governor has put out his, we'll be putting it out in the next couple of weeks, but announced his governor's responsible infrastructure development plan. And so those are 4 principles to do exactly that, to empower communities with the information that they need to decide if these developments are right for them, which ones are. And so the 4 core principles there are energy affordability. If you want to be taking energy to run these things, you got to bring your own. We have transparency. So in terms of resource use, what does that look like? Is it how is it going to impact community life? Hiring local. If you are, occupying this space in the community, what are you providing back in terms of local hiring? And 4th, environmental protection and conservation. So things like water use. And the goal really there is to lift the standard for the types of projects that are coming to Pennsylvania and making sure that communities are empowered to be making those decisions.
Thank you for indulging me on this question. I don't want to get you in trouble because we are filming this, so I just want to make sure I gave you an out there.
Yeah.
Dorian, you said we could jump in.
You could jump in, but I want to get Catherine in the conversation too.
Okay.
So do you have a quick thing on this?
Just a quick thing, local hire. We're doing this with Doñana County in New Mexico. There's a big data AI center project. Local hire, it's hard to hire folks locally if they can't do good, if there aren't good workforce development pathways for them. And so in local hire for organizers out there, workforce development front end through CBAs, through IRB resolutions, through GRT.
Okay, you're doing a whole bunch of alphabet soup, which I have no idea what you're talking about.
Point is, get the workforce development and the wraparound support services and the guaranteed income for workforce development trainees through the Data AI Center CBAs.
Thank you. All right, Catherine, I got to get you into this conversation because you have been at the intersection around tech and inequality for over a decade, maybe 2 decades.
Several decades.
But clearly you're 28, so you're just getting started. And I think you have a book coming out.
No, it came out a year ago.
Oh, it came out a year ago.
Yeah. So, and I'll never write another one, so.
Talk to us about the book because you do World Eaters.
How venture capital is cannibalizing the economy.
So talk about the cannibals for us. Let's talk about the cannibals and talk about the role of cash. I'm going to talk about 2 things. One is, how are you approaching taking on tech companies in terms of the harm and power imbalance they are causing? And then second, what's the role of cash?
Okay, so I wrote a book, but my day job is I run an organization called TechEquity, and we lead a coalition of several dozen, including Economic Security California, organizations who are bringing the voice of people who are affected by AI into the conversation in Sacramento about how to regulate it. And so we are sitting across the table from these companies and really get to see their tactics up close and personal on their home turf in California. So we have an intimate understanding of how they move and how they think and how they work. And through this work, really noticing that the impacts of the technology on the ground were driven by the upstream sort of influence of the capital that was funding the companies, right? Like they were responding to the imperatives that were created for them by investors, and that once that money was deployed and they're responding to those incentives, it's very hard to get companies to, to do differently. And so if you're only focused on regulating the technology on the ground or trying to prevent a data center or get a CBA, 90% of the cake is already baked at that point. And so I started thinking about, how could you shift the upstream incentives to get capital flowing, the incentives of capital to actually align with the outcomes we want. Like we were told that AI was going to be a technology about curing cancer and, robots folding our laundry and all of these things that, and if you ask people what AI could do for them, they have great imaginations about how AI could make our lives better. But the financial imperative, the thing that's going to make investors money, is automating all of our jobs out of existence at a speed that works for investors, right? And so if we're going to sort of preempt that future, and that future is not inevitable, we're going to also need to address the way that capital moves into this industry. And that's really what the book is about, is, how do we align venture capital or other, capital mechanisms to create a different set of incentives that can fund the companies that are actually going to address the things that people want AI to be doing in
So how do we do that?
Well, I mean, this would be a much longer answer, and I don't want to take too much time, but just the short version is the incentives are set up for companies to have to hit grand slams. And that means they have to maximize profit, like go to 11 on profit. Every choice point is a choice point for profit. There's never an opportunity to, prioritize a different kind of value. And they have to do it on a time frame that is very short. So move fast and break things is really true. But there are lots of good companies and the kinds of outcomes we might want to see that are going to happen on a slower timeline, or, they're going to... the market that they're serving is not as big. And those are good companies too. And they're often serving markets in marginalized communities. So can we design sort of capital vehicles that will see the value in those opportunities rather than just forcing all of those companies to try to hit grand slams and maximize growth and profit at every step? And there are a lot of examples that I outline in the book about how you can design capital.
Give us one that we might have heard of or know about.
Well, there's a company called, this is not at all related to cash. We're like way off on a tangent, but there's a company called...
We're going to get back there.
Butcher Box, which some of you may be customers of, but it was one of the many sort of grew during the pandemic when people were ordering food at home, and it's a sort of like higher scale meat home delivery company. And the guy who started it had run a venture-backed company before, and his investors kind of put him through the ringer and killed the company and did all the bad things that investors do. And he decided he was not going to take VC to start this company. So he started it with on Kickstarter with just like donations from friends and family, grew it into a $500 million business that he really strongly believes, if he had taken VC, would have died during the pandemic when there was like a pull, the sort of shore, the water went out and people started going back to the grocery store. A lot of his competitors failed who took VC, and he was able to survive that because he didn't have investors pushing him to take risks that the business didn't really need to take on. So that's $500 million worth of value that he created that would have just gone to zero had he taken investor money. And so that's a good company that is serving its workers. They are doing programs that like make meatpacking a safer job. And these are things that he would never have had to do never been able to do if he had taken VC. So there's just like other ways of funding companies that we need to invest in. I think we can invest in as we transition, and maybe that's one of the things we can, talk about is how to get AI companies to be paying their fair share. We talked about an AI dividend in the last breakout panel. That could, and the revenue from that could go to fund some of these other capital vehicles that are sort of challenging the logic of venture capital.
I want to stay with you for one more question, because you've thought a lot about not just how do we redistribute, say, income or even power from companies, corporations to people, but you've been thinking about just how do we restructure and change the way we think about this altogether? So for instance, we talked about Waymo earlier, because there's a whole bunch of Waymos here in town, and you've helped us think about what would it look like for drivers who might be displaced to have a stake in the company in a different way. So I want you to say more about that, because on the theme of cash as supporting economies and democracies in transition, the whole rideshare taxi business is about to undergo a massive transition. I assume it's happening in San Francisco already. It seems to be happening here in Austin. It might happen in New York City. How should we think differently about it?
Yeah.
In terms of like ownership and power in addition to cash?
Yeah, I was a little hesitant to say at this conference, which is about cash, that I think I want to challenge all of you to start thinking differently about that concept in an AI world where productivity is now flowing to capital and not to labor. And redistributing via cash is not going to have the same impact in this economy, I think, than it has in the past. And so I think we might want to be more expansive about cash to include capital and ownership. And in the example of, so the AI dividend is one example of that. You could somehow, quote unquote tax, but it could be some other way to pull the productivity benefits out of AI companies to invest in funds that then, like the Alaska Fund, that pay residents. And the last panel talked a lot about this for the folks who are in the breakout, of how that is not a sort of, the challenge of it feeling like a handout. And really you can frame that as like, the AI industry is built on all of our labor, all of our creativity, all of human knowledge. I think the original sin of the AI industry is that it was, this technology was created in private labs. It wasn't something that, like the internet, was developed in partnership with the government. So all of that wealth creation is held in private hands. And we're gonna have to have some mechanism to get that value out. And it's ours, right? It's ours. And so this really is more like a baby bond in the sense that we should have a vested stake in the growth of this industry, and finding ways for us to really feel, develop policies that bring the value out, and not in a way that's just sort of like, oh, they pay this, it's like paying indulgences, they pay the cash off, and we're paying people off, and we're just gonna keep doing the harms that we're doing, but really giving people an ownership stake in how these companies grow. On the Waymo example, the interesting idea, I think there, and Ryan was running a program on this, we were talking about this before in the green room. What if, you somehow found a way to have the drivers who are being displaced gain ownership of the Waymo? And I was thinking of something like a franchise model where, they kind of run the vehicle and have an ownership stake in it, but sort of using the Waymo platform and accessing some of the other stuff that helps them kind of run the business. That feels like something that would work a lot better to me than just like taxing Waymo and then creating a pooled fund that then pays out to the drivers who are now like, well, okay, that's great, but what am I supposed to do all day? Now I have to like remake myself. Where they can use this car, it's still doing for them. They can treat it like a business. They have to figure out how to, optimize that, the income from that car. And they can also sort of find time to do other things. It's not like they have to be on the road for 12 or 16 hours a day. So it feels like there are opportunities in this new economy for things like that. It's going to require people to be at the table. And right now, in these rooms where we're sitting across from these companies, they have really just, owned the process. They own our political system right now. And the single most important thing we can do to get to that future is to break that stranglehold that they have on the political process.
So you talk about political power.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry. Don't be. So that sets me up to come back to you, since you work in politics, right?
That's why I said sorry, because, you know, Shivum has a boss.
But like, you said something, and I want to ask just a very pointed question. You said for the Uber, Lyft taxi driver who gets displaced by Waymo, like, then the question is, what are they supposed to do? From a policy perspective, what are humans supposed to do? How do we think about that? How does the governor think about that of a state where workers are being displaced by AI or other things? Like, how do we answer the question, what are humans supposed to do?
I wish I had the answer. I heard the term life design recently, and I've been, it really stuck with me because I think there's this enormous question of where does fulfillment come from? I don't know where the governor sits on this question. I will not presume to speak for him or the administration, but I will say, there's this paper out of Brookings 2 months ago maybe with Sorrell Friedler and a couple others that talks about the care economy. And I think it raises this question of what are the jobs where we decide that the human relationship is actually at the core of this work, whether that's teaching, whether that's nursing, whether that's therapy, and we want this to be a job that's done by a human. And I've been, reflecting on that question a lot lately, and I think, it raises the next question of how do we adequately and appropriately compensate and value that work. So no sharp answers for you there, Dorian, but that's how I've initially been thinking about it.
Marcela, how would you answer that question? And I want you to bring us back, because Catherine just mentioned politics and power. You are the organizer here. Help us think through those two things. One, what are the kinds of work human beings should do? And then also, what do we all deserve just by being human? Cash. And then second, what is the role of organizing and power building in getting to the North Star? Whatever our vision is of what comes next, what is the role of organizing and power building in collaboration with smart policy people, people in politics? What's the role of organizing and power?
Well, to the first question, I'm so glad I'm grounded in, and that my organization is grounded in its membership, because we actually have conversations about AI. And so we go around the room and we say, well, what are our jobs? What are the jobs that we have? What are the jobs that we're likely to have? And at the end of those conversations, just a lot of the work that immigrant workers are doing in our economy aren't going to be easily replaced by AI. So their conversations are different in different rooms depending on who you're organizing. And so but to the point of, because we're a part of the care economy and because we're, in childcare, we're in all of these different things. And even in the oil and gas industry, when we're thinking about advanced energy or geothermal or all of the things that New Mexico is contemplating right now in the green energy space, there are going to require oil and gas workers to make some shifts, but to bring in the skills that they have into these new industries. And so that's a smaller answer. But when we're thinking about how to shape our next economy, that's where we need to be, that's where the role of community-based organizations is so essential. Because, and we've heard it a lot during this conference, which I love, because I've been to 3 of these now, and this is the 3rd one where we're really talking about growing power and organizing, and the union of for guaranteed income in Chicago. That isn't just about fighting for guaranteed income. It's not just fighting for cash. It is about fighting for a space to craft and shape our future economy. And that's, I think, what is so important. So from an organizing perspective, government does not and cannot do this on its own. Government becomes responsive to our communities when we organize power. And membership-based organizations, for those organizers that are in the room, we are the trusted messengers. We understand the barriers that systems and that academics miss. We can reach workers that are excluded from these formal institutions, and we can help design the solutions with our communities in mind. And so we know that economic security worldwide, and certainly in this country, weakens our democracy. So when people are working nonstop just to survive, they don't have access to workforce development opportunities, mobility, time with their family, time with their children. They're not going to be able to organize and engage civically or politically, and they're certainly not going to be able to build for power. Everything that, we always say only organizing, we're talking about the monsters that we're living with, only organizing can save us. And that's what we can do with this movement. And so we know that cash creates the breathing room. We've talked about that to be able to do that, but it also allows us to create vehicles through which we can continue to build power. And so it allows us to be able to organize beyond our survival right now. So at Somos, guaranteed income and cash is not just an anti-poverty policy. It is part of building a just transition where workers in New Mexico are not disposable, where rural communities are not abandoned, where economic transitions and transformations aren't happening on the backs of the very people who powered that economy in the first place. That's how our members are seeing it in New Mexico, and I hope around the country. But what I know is that when 78% of immigrant oil and gas families and parents don't want their kids going into the industry, that the energy transition and the economic transition has already begun in their imaginations. And so we have to, the question for us, I think, and for this ecosystem and for the movement is, how do we help turn that robust and ripe imagination into organized power and not leave it to the market chaos or the political backlash that we're experiencing now and that I'm sure we're gonna experience. So at Somos, we think about this work and these cash policy wins not as just a way to survive this current economy, but to help shape a future one where we can make the decisions that are embedded in the question that you just asked us, right? Which is, what do we want the economy to look like? What do we want AI to take over or not take over? But if we're not organizing for political power, then our dear friend, Governor Shapiro, isn't gonna know what to do.
Can I just...
Right?
Jump in, yep.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's really important to know, and I've heard this sort of implicit in the conversation about how AI is going to affect the labor market, is this idea that AI is going to replace a worker one for one, and that if you are in a job where AI cannot replace one for one, then this is not a problem for you. And I think that's a really dangerous way to think about how AI is going to affect the labor market for a few reasons. One is that a lot of the ways that AI is affecting the labor market is through what we call bossware, which is AI becoming basically a person's manager. And this does affect lower wage service workers disproportionately. So, there are examples of nursing home workers who are given apps that kind of manage staffing, and they don't take into account, how long it takes to move around the building because nobody asked the workers how long it actually takes to move around the building. It's resulted in dangerously low staffing levels that have resulted in deaths at these nursing homes. So algorithmic wage setting, so algorithms that are sort of setting your wage for you in a dynamic way, sort of kind of using your data against you to lower your rate of pay. All of these things are gonna degrade work and make it harder for people to organize. And maybe to your point, even heighten the need for having supports, cash or otherwise, that allow people to sort of healthily make that transition. But if what we're transitioning to is not a world where everybody's going to be out of work and robots are doing all the jobs, but it's actually a world where we've just sort of depressed labor demand to the point where workers have even less power than they have now and are working longer hours for less pay and are doing it in a way that there's deep, surveillance that makes their lives really bad, then, if you've kept that job, that doesn't really mean that much, right? So I think we need to take this all into account, that all workers need to be thinking about this. not just the ones whose jobs are going to be replaced by AI. Having said that, the ones who are being replaced right now are tech workers. They're sort of the canaries in the coal mine for this. And what we're seeing in the tech workplace is really interesting, and I think often offers an opportunity to sort of do cross-class organizing between service workers, traditionally unionized workers, and tech workers who, to date, really have not thought of themselves as workers, and now are starting to see, oh shit, I don't own this company, right? Like, I am a worker, and they're in charge of me. Facebook just deployed all of this technology that is surveilling every keystroke and everything that shows up on a worker's screen in order to train AI replacements for those jobs. It's like the most dystopian thing I can think of in the workplace, and this is happening to, you know, these high-paid workers who we have thought had, you know, we've spent the last 15 years trying to train people to get into those jobs, and now they are sort of these, you know, the canaries in the coal mine for what's coming. So I think we just need to think more expansively about what AI is going to mean for the labor market and the more insidious way it's going to undermine worker power as we try to advocate for what the future economy should look like.
So we're coming to a close, and I have a quick thought that I want to offer, but I'm going to give you time to think about this last question. So in a minute or less, I want each of you to just articulate what is your North Star for this transition of all kinds, and how do we get from here to there? So that's the final question. The thought, in terms of especially workers in Silicon Valley, so I live in Washington, D.C., and you might have heard the Doge boys came to town last year from Silicon Valley, and they fired a whole bunch of people. And they fired a whole bunch of people who had really well-paying jobs, middle class, white collar. And I have to tell you, I have not seen mostly white, mostly middle class, very highly educated people become radicalized so fast in my life. Like, they want to be revolutionaries now. And I joke with some of my friends, like, if you look at the history of revolutionaries around the world, they were mostly middle class who hit ceilings under dictatorships or authoritarianism or whatever it was. Think Che Guevara. He was not poor. Fidel was not poor. They were middle class, but they were under a dictatorship. And they hit a ceiling, and they got radicalized, and then things happened. There are a lot of those people in Washington, D.C. right now. I imagine there are going to be a lot of those people in Silicon Valley. So I say that to say there is a shift in political consciousness happening in real time with this disruption and transition. That means it's an organizing opportunity, as you just said, Catherine. And I think we have to seize it and not write people off necessarily, but like welcome them into the tent. It's like, yeah, you're pissed. We're pissed too. We've been pissed for a long ass time. So welcome to the party and come join us because together we can win. So each of you, in 1 minute or less, you can clap for that. Thank you. We are building a movement here, y'all, right? That wasn't convincing. Are we building a movement? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Catherine, and I'm going to go to you, and then you're going to be the final word on North Star. How do we get from here to there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the North Star for me is accountability. And, you know, I've spent the week sitting in the courtroom in the Musk versus Altman trial in Oakland, which is juicy. It's very Bravo. Yeah, Real Housewives of Silicon Valley. But the thing that's like stuck in my craw watching this is that the plaintiff in that case should not be Elon Musk. The plaintiff in that case should be the people of the state of California. And the Attorney General of California dropped the ball on this, I think. I mean, he sort of let OpenAI, I'm not going to go into the details of the case, but basically let OpenAI get away with breaking the law as they transitioned from a nonprofit to a for-profit. And the only reason Elon was able to bring this case is because he was original donor and has a petty beef with Sam Altman. That's the only reason he pursued it. And so we are now living in a world where justice hinges on petty beefs between billionaires, and the only way billionaires are going to be held accountable is if another billionaire hates them enough to pay the lawyers to do it. And that makes me sick. And so my North Star is accountability for the companies. And if there's accountability, we can get back to some balance where we start to determine and define what this technology is going to mean for our society and our economy.
Thank you, Catherine. Shivum.
I was so intent on listening to Catherine's answer, I forgot to think about mine. I think there's a lot of resilience work to do. I think we have systems. For example, it's when you were talking about, Marcela, workers not getting UI benefits. That's the type of stuff that keeps us up at night at the state. So how do we ensure that the systems and the supports that we have now continue to be resilient? And part of that is actually, with the AI labor letter, making sure that the state workforce, state employment continues to be a source of stability and opportunity for workers of all stripes. So I think that's part of it, and I think it's also learning from the work that folks in this room are doing, building the evidentiary base that we need so that if and when things become if we move to a world of AI-driven job displacement, we have the evidence base we need to act. And so, you can look federally, the reaction to trade liberalization in this country left a lot to be desired, but there were programs, cash programs, coming out of that. For example, RTAA, that did provide workers with paths to reemployment. And so I would say that those are my two North Stars. One is resilience, and two is that proactive evidence base that we need to kind of inhale at the state to make sure that we have the systems in place and we can react if and when necessary.
Thank you, Shivum. Marcela?
Yeah, all of the above. But it's just not, and I will repeat it, only organizing will save us. We can't have accountability. And it's hard because, God, how do you have accountability with these housewife billionaires, right? But we have to. The only way we can have the resilience, the only way we can have the accountability is if we're organizing communities. And this is such a great opportunity. Organizing around cash assistance, not just for inclusion, not just for safety net, but for economic mobility. We've heard it in many different panels over the course of the day, right? It's not the, what is it? It's not the safety net, it's the trampoline. But I always think too, in addition to it being the trampoline for that family and for a community, it is the catalyst. I haven't come up with a fun little metaphor or anything, but it really is, it is the catalyst for transforming an infrastructure and an economy locally and maybe nationally. And so when I think about how we've been able to win what we've been able to win, and there's still so much more to win in New Mexico, it wasn't just because we went to the State House and demanded, as immigrant oil and gas workers, reinvestment of our money into our communities. It's because every election we knock on doors. We knocked on doors during a pandemic for the census to make sure that we were a part of the redistricting fight that made our congressional seat competitive for our Democrat who happens to be a Democrat in that when it wasn't a competitive seat for 40 years. And so these are the folks that are organizing at every level to build the power so that we can do that. Now, are we doing that nationally? No, but we're doing it in some of the most conservative, red, anti-immigrant, anti-worker communities in the state of New Mexico, and that's undocumented and mixed status immigrant workers that are fighting for the whole state. It's not lost on me that there are 500 workers right now getting $1,000 a month for a year to retrain and to be economically mobile, to get their ESL, their welding certificate, all of these things. Even healthcare, they're becoming medical assistants, CNAs, phlebotomists for rural communities. But most of those workers aren't even immigrants. So that's our big tent, right? Immigrants are fighting for not just themselves in our state, but for everyone. And so if everyone joined us and we were all big tent fighting for those kinds of structural changes along with the electoral work, along with making sure that we're fighting for the folks who are gonna put the good judges in place, that is what's so necessary. So in the end, God, I really hope we take this away, and this is such a great opportunity to do it. Only organizing will save us, so let's organize the shit out of cash.
So listen, thanks to all of you for sticking with us all day. Do not go anywhere, because I want you to help me thank our three panelists. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Marcela. Thank you, Shivum, for a very, I hope I didn't get you in trouble, for a very insightful conversation. And there's one or two last things we're gonna do, so don't go anywhere, everybody. Thank you.